Hi, I'm Betty Folliard. I'm a former state representative. I am currently the founder of ERA Minnesota. ERA Minnesota is an organization dedicated to passing an equal rights amendment into our state and federal constitutions. And I worked for several years in the office of Congressman Keith Ellison, who is now AG Keith Ellison, our Attorney General for the state of Minnesota.
I am Antonia Apolinario-Wilcoxon, and as Fartun insists, you're Dr. Antonia Apolinario-Wilcoxon, and I appreciate that. I come from Brazil. I'm an immigrant from Brazil, and I have lived in Minnesota for many years. Formerly with the Minnesota Department of Human Services leading their equity initiative, trying to address the disparities that in Minnesota continue to be quite stubborn in terms of populations of color, immigrants, American Indians who don't seem to benefit from the wealth of this state. This is not a forest state, so it's troublesome when we examine the conditions. I'm here to talk about, again, equal pay and the importance of Black women, businesses, and all of the progress these women have made, but we are still lagging behind, not only behind men, but also other women, and that's not okay. Thank you.
I'm State Representative Mary Kunesh-Podein. I was elected to the House of Representatives 4 years ago, and at that time I joined other people of color within the state legislature to create the first Posse Caucus, People of Color Indigenous. And I also joined 2 other American Indian legislators, and we together formed the very first American Indian caucus in the state legislature. And so as a woman of that comes from a long line of very strong Lakota women, Standing Rock Lakota women, I'm very proud to serve in the House of Representatives and to bring the issues not just of women, but of our American Indian communities to the legislature. Thank you.
My name is Raie Gessesse, and I'm the child of Ethiopian immigrants to America. By day, I go to school. I'm a student at Hamline University. I study public health and political science. And most recently, I'm a fellow for a national nonpartisan organization called Ignite National. Ignite is currently the largest young women's political organization in the country. And what we do is we train young women in communities to run for office. Why? Leadership, especially of young women and women in our legislature and all across like mayoral levels and boards and commissions are very, very disproportionately men. So that's what I do, and I'm excited to talk with you all today.
Wow, round of applause, please. So Betty, you and I met working in an area. Would you tell our audiences, those who are here and those who are watching, a little background about what ERA does and then what's going on with communities of color and especially women of African descent, please?
Perfect. Thank you. So the Equal Rights Amendment, in my view, is the overarching umbrella that takes all issues that affect women, women of color, immigrant women, women of all descriptions, and will empower us, give us the clout of the Constitution to protect us against all forms of discrimination, whether it is pay inequity, sexual violence, whether it is pregnancy discrimination, and even the laws that affect men in a negative way, discriminating on the basis of sex. So it's 24 simple words. It's equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. And it mirrors the 19th Amendment. This is the 100th anniversary of women in America, particularly at that time white women in America, gaining the right to vote. There were still barriers to voting even as we speak to this day, there are still barriers to voting for all. But 100 years ago, women finally got the first piece of women actually having a right that was defined in our U.S. Constitution. The Equal Rights Amendment was written in 1921, a year after women won that fight, and it was written by a woman by the name of Alice Paul, who had worked on the 19th Amendment language. And it mirrors the 19th Amendment language. The 19th Amendment says essentially voting rights shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. That's pretty close to what it says. And the ERA is equality of rights shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. And how this ties into particularly women of African descent, if you look at the now only 12 states in the nation that have not ratified the Equal Rights Amendment, and they're kind of a band of states in the Confederacy. And in those states, it's African American women who are taking the lead. And why? Because they understand that sexism and racism are the two heads of the hydra, of the monster, and we've got to cut off both heads to finally achieve equality.
Thank you for giving us the background. I want to acknowledge that we have a Native representative here. I have a prayer I've memorized as an Ojibwe language, so I did not want to say it yet. But Antonia, we know the gap between women of color, Native women, but this conference, we just did not want to talk about the problems. But could you say in a few minutes, what are the gaps? We already know in summary, but then what are the solutions?
I think that we cannot avoid talking about solutions unless we acknowledge and know the nature of the problem. Yes. And I don't know, Marissa, if you could show some of the slides, because what I'd like to show is that the picture doesn't look very encouraging. But women have faced challenges around the world many times over. So this is not an impossible picture. And as you can see, and it really doesn't need description, I just picked this from the website of the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, DEED, and it's dated 2018. So what we have there are the labor force participation rates and unemployment rate, and looking at women by their cultural background. So when you look at white men who tend to prevail in the economic force, labor force, then we have white women, Asian women, black women have made some strides, and then we see Hispanic women and American Indian and Native and American Native women. So when we look at unemployment rate, again, black women and our sisters, American Indian and American Native. Am I saying these initials correctly?
It's American Indian Alaska Native.
Thank you very much.
AIAN. Yes.
That is an initial that that's why I should have done my homework. But thank you. Marissa, if you could please go to the next slides. And then again, we see that the median earnings by age and race for women. Again, the picture looks at 44,500 for white women, Asian, black, American Indian, Alaska Native, and Hispanic origin. Next, just briefly. The median annual earnings by age, and again, age continues to be a challenge. Hourly wage gap. So for us, we made 20 cents on the dollar as compared to other women. The benchmark used was white women. We could go forth. And then educational attainment. As we know, educational barriers, educational disparities continue to be a serious issue, and it's reflected. If we don't have education, our chances of earning a higher income diminish. And that is a serious issue for us as we try, because most of us are leading families, and sometimes we don't have a spouse to help us. So this provides, is that another one? I can't remember. Okay. These are just the choices of career and the salary that one can expect to make. But I'd like to now turn to solutions. What are some of the hopeful things that we can, it's okay, we can finish those. Thank you, Marissa. On May 11, 2014, Governor Mike Dayton signed the Women's Economic Security Act into law. And he stated back then that we honor our mothers and grandmothers. We have taken a giant step forward for Minnesota's working women and families and their families. It should not require a law to ensure that women are treated fairly in the workplace or that they are paid equally for their work. However, too many women still experience serious economic disparities, unfair gender barriers, and other workplace discrimination. One of the solutions is that there is now a certificate requirement by the Minnesota Department of Human Rights that if you are a company that has a budget over $500,000, you need to apply for that certificate, and you need to demonstrate that you are going to enact the equal pay laws. The Minnesota State Departments and agencies, the Metropolitan Council, the Minnesota Sports Facility Authority, the Metropolitan Airport Commissions, and the Metropolitan Mosquito Control Commission, except as discussed below, are now obligated to ensure that their large contracting partners have an equal pay certificate prior to executing a contract for goods and services over $500,000. And
Gosh, go ahead.
I think it's important for us to mention that there are some existing laws on the books so that when we are in the process of obtaining contracts, we know what to ask for. We know that it's in place. I stop here.
That is the doctor talking. So data and facts and facts and facts. So Mary, you're a legislator and Native woman. Take whatever minutes you need and talk about the state of Native women, what policies, what you're working on, what you have worked on, please.
Thanks very much. Well, first of all, I have to thank Betty. Betty invited me to carry the ERA amendment request in the House, and we were able to pass that through the House last year. And so that was very successful. That was quite historic. Unfortunately, we did not get that passed in the Senate, and that's what held us up here in Minnesota. There were really two issues that affected the passage of that perhaps in the Senate that is Republican controlled, and they had an issue. We used the word gender as an inclusive term rather than the word sex in our statement, and they felt that that was too inclusive. It was not specific to a woman and a man, but allowed for a variety of folks who identify in different ways, and they were not comfortable with that. And then they also felt that it expanded abortion rights. And that definitely was not one of our goals in passing the ERA. We are looking to have that statement of equality in our Minnesota Constitution. And so hopefully we're not done. We're going to keep working on that for sure. We're going to get it done in this lifetime. And as a Native woman, I look through our legislation with that lens of the historic trauma, not just of our American Indian folks, but of all folks of color, because we know that any continent, any country that colonization took place women and children oftentimes came out at the short end of the stick. And so I am always looking through at our legislation to see that when we are creating bills and legislation and laws and stature, that the folks that it will affect most severely or to the best are recognized. So, for example, our American Indian women have suffered, have gone missing and murdered at higher rates than any other population in this country, probably in this continent and in any country. And so last year, I was able to pass a piece of legislation that started the task force to study our American Indian missing and murdered Indigenous women. And we know that by nature, it's going to affect the girls, the boys, the men, and our Two-Spirit folks. And that has been quite historic, monumental. Many states are looking at this issue and passing legislation around certain issues, but I feel like Minnesota has probably one of the most comprehensive pieces of legislation to look at what is happening, what has happened, and what we can do in the future to pretty much eradicate that sort of violence against our American Indian women and girls. The other thing that I have been able to do as a state legislature is to pass pieces of the Teacher of Color Indigenous Act. We know that when there are instructors and teachers and support systems in our school that reflect our student population, when there are teachers that speak the language that you speak, that look a little bit or a lot like you, that understand the cultural significance and the trauma that your family or your communities might have experienced, that they identify better and they can connect in a much more positive way, and that definitely makes a difference in the academics learning as well as attendance and the self-esteem of our students. So there is a very comprehensive bill, once again, that looks at how we can attract folks to become teachers, because Minnesota is really suffering from a shortage of teachers, especially teachers of color. And so we would like to, we're creating this whole continuum of support and funding to recruit teachers, to have school districts grow their own teaching staff, and then we looked at how we can help students with financial assistance while they're studying. During that student teaching, that's 4 months where you are working full-time with no pay. And I know what that's like. When I did it, I was 35 years old. I was a single mom, did my 4 months of student teaching. The government went on shutdown. I couldn't get my teaching license. I ended up going on welfare and it took me a good 1.5 years before I even could just get my paycheck to maybe get me through the month. And so we want to make sure that there are safety nets in place for those sort of situations. And then we also find that once we get our teachers of color in there, it's often very isolating because there are not many of them. And so we are looking at funding and ways to support those teachers in those first years of teaching, and then provide mentorship and retention means. So, as I said, most and all of the legislation that I work on really focuses on how we can increase our folks of color in the fabric of Minnesota, and also to ensure that we are going to continue to build a really strong, beautiful community here in Minnesota.
I still had a whole day just to talk to you. Okay, are you millennial or Gen Z?
I'm Gen Z.
Gen Z, all right.
Young.
They put everything on this group. So I have a question. The question that I just got text: as a student and your political involvement, what are your hopes and what you want to ensure for your generation of young women of color to get equal pay?
I have several answers to that. I will begin by saying in 2016, I was appointed by former Governor Mark Dayton to sit on the Young Women's Initiative of Minnesota. And the Young Women's Initiative of Minnesota is a public-private partnership between the Women's Foundation of Minnesota and the Governor's Office. And what we're working on is really creating a Minnesota in which every young woman and every young girl is able to be the champion of their own lives. And that's huge. When we talk about being the champion of their own lives, what these women are talking about is that women often have their lives determined for them by people who are in their communities, their families, or laws and policies, and they don't give them an opportunity to choose and to be empowered in the choices that they make. And the really cool thing about the work that we do is that we're asset-based. We look at the assets that young women have and we capitalize on that. Oftentimes I feel that we look at young women and we're like, oh, there's all of these problems, but the problems are always external of what the young women have to offer. So, I mean, like one of my favorite experiences of this role is that we get to sit with high-level business, philanthropic, nonprofit leaders, and we get to tell them exactly what young women need in their companies. One example of this is Best Buy. The CEO of Best Buy used to sit on our council. And after hearing about some of the blueprint policy recommendations that we had that included listening sessions that we conducted all across the state, they were like, wow, young women in STEM are very underrepresented. What can we do to help support that? And they launched a program that is specifically designed to get young women involved in STEM. That is one example of how bringing young women to the table can change policies and can change systems. Systems change is one of our mottos there, and what that means is embedding equity and embedding intersectionality into our processes. So with that, hopes that I have moving forward for young women and girls is really, I hope that we have a society, and I hope that we build a society that is able to empower and build confidence in young women. I'm going to be honest, we've coddled our men growing up all the time, and there are even some mothers that coddle their sons more than they empower their women, their young girls. And this leads to young women not feeling empowered to call out when something doesn't make them feel good, or being able to demand that they should get paid equitably for the work that they provide. All of these things is what happens. So I think building confidence in our young women and girls is so, so important, and we need to invest in that. We need to invest in that, not just because it feels good and not just because we want equity, but also because it'll stimulate our economy, it'll make us a better nation. So I think we really need to be intentional about what we mean when we say we need to empower and build confidence in young women.
Did I just heard someone announce her candidacy? Is that, did you just say what she said? I was like, okay, am I, what place? Wow, I'll vote for you. Just totally convinced me. So yes, that's what the first generation do, to put everything on you so then you can speak and articulate this eloquent human being. Thank you. I'll just leave it to the three of you. About all of us, there's the immigrant, there is the African-American woman, there is the Native women within our own minority women's circle. How do we even focus to make the 84 cents that white women do get paid? Because there's the immigrant, there's the African, there's this and that and that. So how do we, and Perik, you can chime in, but how do we even come up to the 84 cents? Because one of the biggest problem we have is we as a women of all color, we're not together to even talk to how do we make dollar. And policymakers are smart. You guys, some would have sitting here. They're saying, well, how do we talk to the one who will make 56 cents, the 74 cents? So us as a woman, we're not even together. How do we talk to each other and do that? You can start, Perry, in a few minutes, and then we can go as way around.
Yeah, Fartun, first of all, I didn't acknowledge at the beginning that I meant to the outstanding work that Isarun is doing to empower women. So God bless you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
And I've been looking at women's empowerment globally. You know, last year I was at the UN with the CSW, the Commission on the Status of Women, for 10 days, working internationally with women. I've been studying this. I went with a group of leaders to Israel and Palestine, looking at women of all creeds and colors there, to see how to empower women, how I did this in Bangladesh and India as well. And my travels have all kind of been looking internationally at this problem. We look, your question was specifically, how do we get women of color in this country to raise them to the 84 cents or the 80 cents, whatever measurement you use, of white women. And I say, let's lift all boats to the 100%. Let's get to the point where women and men are paid equally for the same work. And that's my goal. It's not incremental. And that's why I come back to the Equal Rights Amendment, because that would put into our Constitution the checks and balances in the supreme law of the land that gives women the power to go to the courts and have the protections that currently we keep on getting turned back by the Supreme Court on. So that's, number one. The other thing is that I just want to touch on the fact that women, it's not just our paid work and, women of color getting less pay for that. It's also the care work that women do in this society every day, every year, all of our lives. And there was an article yesterday in the New York Times that said that if we paid for care work, whether it's taking care of your children, your infants, taking care of your mother, father, or other members of your family, or having to go out to purchase all of the goods that you need to help to raise your family. If we paid minimum wage for care work, this country would see a $1.5 trillion increase in our economy, $1.5 trillion, and internationally it would be $10.9 trillion. So let's look at this holistically when we look at the issue.
Because we are talking to both you here in Minnesota, but also internationally, I think that there are some developments for this year, 2020, that we need to observe. It's the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Conference. It is the 64th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. The Generation Equality Forum is going to be happening in Mexico in May and in France in July. There will be a high-level meeting of the 75th General Assemblies on gender equality in September. And of course, we as women are mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, and it's in its 5th year as a milestone, in addition to the 10th anniversary of United Nations Women. I was at the home of a very good friend of mine from Ghana. And yesterday she invited a number of us, mostly her colleagues from the organization she works for, but I was fortunate to be invited in, and there were some others. Dr. Henderson, who is a 50-year-plus public servant in the St. Paul schools, was there. And one of the things that Rosamond, my friend from Ghana, was exhorting all of us to do, and I think this message holds true for all of us around the world, said, look at your shoulders. Do you have wide shoulders? That means you need to carry someone on your shoulders, because we stand on somebody else's shoulder. The fact that I'm here, the fact that I was welcomed in a suburban neighborhood because the school district was better, in which my good friend Betty Folliard was the school board member. She wasn't even a legislator yet, but she invited me into her home. It's on her shoulders that I stand so that I can see farther, and also allow the younger generation as well as my counterparts stand on my shoulders so that you can see further and you can do more. it's really not necessarily for us to say, oh, you're an immigrant, maybe I need to do this specific thing, or you are from rural Minnesota, maybe I need. All of us need help. All of us are going to need the support, collaborative partnerships. We are going to engage with each other so we know what do we bring. For the most part, we bring a wealth to the table. And when half of the population of this world is not at the table, there are some absent narratives. There are some absent contributions that, as Betty just quoted, it's in dollars, folks. You can quantify it. And I think that that's an urgent need for us to stop for a while and say, how do we include, and who is missing from this table, and how can I make the space so that person is invited? So a lot of my work with equity strategies is exactly that. How can I convene conversations in which, yes, people may talk about serious issues that are impacting them? How do we move to action by talking to one another and understanding what might be better solutions for all of us?
It's interesting that we are here in this discussion around international women. My children's father is from Lebanon, from Beirut, so my children are half Lebanese. And it was interesting for me over the years to see the role of Middle Eastern women and American women and how I fit into that intersectionality. And oftentimes, we as Americans will look at other cultures and say, those women are more suppressed. Those women don't have so many rights. Those women, are subjective to their husbands or their men. But then I look at our society, and here in Minnesota, and in a way, it's not that much different. But it's how you use your power, it's how you use your influence. That's what I realized. And as I said, I'm very fortunate to come from a long line of strong women. My auntie, my great aunt, was the one and only chairman of the Standing Rock Reservation. She's the only woman that ever achieved that level in that community. And I heard about her growing up. I have strong mothers, strong aunties in their own way, but I also have 5 sisters and so many women in my family who really inspired me and showed me and gave me the support at times that I needed. And so it's really important that we are working with each other, that we are opening our arms and are carrying the burden as we go through this, especially for our younger generation. And I come to the legislature because I was, in one way, empowered by my own daughter. My daughter got involved in politics in Minnesota. She's a political organizer. She's the executive director of Take Action Minnesota. And it was because of her that I experienced my first step into the political arena, working on different campaigns and candidacy. So when I see somebody such as you and the work that you're doing, it inspires me to want to not only support all of you, but we need to share our experience in the struggles that we have. Our American Indian women earn maybe 58 cents to the dollar of a white man. And so much of this is the product of the historic trauma of our American Indian communities and the continued viewpoints and discrimination against our American Indian communities that have, for centuries, been intentionally destroyed and broken up and lied to and cheated, and yet they expect those communities to somehow prosper. And when we don't, look at that group of people, they're just feeding off of our state. But I think it is so important that we are opening up the opportunities for women, that we are standing together, that we are teaching each other skills, the skills of negotiating a salary. I mean, how many people know that you really can and you should negotiate a salary? Women will go in there and too often, and maybe historically, they will take whatever the first offer is. But what we need to know is that we can go in there and we can negotiate. We can say, I did this, I can do this, I will make your company better by these skills that I have. And then we need to share that with each other. You know, so often you're not supposed to share what you make as a salary or what you were offered. That transparency has to happen, because that's one of those control issues that happen when you don't know what that person next to you is making. And if it's a white man, he's probably making, you know, a lot more money over the span of a year. I mean, for American Indian women, if they were to have that same equitable pay as a white man, that is easily $9,000 to $12,000 a year. Mm-hmm. Imagine what women, families with that additional amount could do. And it's just because you are a woman, you are a Native American woman, you're an African American woman, whatever. Our Latinx women are also at that very low pay rate. So we really need to unite, and we need to empower each other, and we need to ensure that there are laws and such as the ERA or equal pay legislation that is going into place, because when we are paying our women, when we are achieving that, it is a direct impact on our communities as a whole.
I think what I'm hearing, and I completely agree with, is one, we need to build collective solidarity amongst women. For every reason, like the opposition is always trying to divide us. Why? Because it's a mechanism of control. That's how people are able to divide and control people. But what I'm hearing is that we all need to collectively build our solidarity amongst each other so we're able to all achieve the equity that we deserve. The second thing that I'm hearing is intergenerational conversations. That doesn't take place that often. I feel like I'm gonna be honest, like Gen Zs are like, oh, like the older folks are too slow and we need to get things done.
Say more on that. Yeah.
You know, there is that divide. But I think a way that we can reconcile that is come together and be like, okay, so what are some things that, you know, the older generations have learned, some wisdom that you can share with the young folks, and then what's a way that we can ignite that? Because I feel like the younger generation, we're very hopeful because we should be. I mean, we shouldn't be paid. No. This is just basic. I mean, like for me, it's like the fact that I even have to sit up here and say that we should be paid equitably is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And that's, as a young person, that's just not how I think. With that, though, I feel like if we engage in these conversations, we can build strategies and movements that are beyond our vision. I just completely, wholly agree with that. One thing that I know that you just said that I really resonate with is we don't talk about money enough, and I think we need to talk about money because if we don't, we will. This is what happens. So yeah.
So I wish we could have all the time. Betty, you're leaving. You've started amazing legacy, and I wanted to see this thing to pass. So, in a full force with Isuroni C4, I will be joining you. Let's think about looking at 2020. We have census coming up. We have election coming up. We have people to elect that are sitting here into offices. One word. I know it's too hard, but think about one word of 2020, what you see, hopefully, when we meet 2021, March 7 or March 8. What do you hope to gain by 2021? What do you would like to see? Word.
Can't be one word.
Okay.
Okay, so this year, just this year alone, the Equal Rights Amendment, and we talk about laws. You mentioned laws. I like laws. I was a lawmaker. However, laws are fickle. Laws are unevenly distributed. Laws continue to, they work over here, they don't work over there. They might work in this court, they might not. That's why we have to embed equal rights into our Constitution, which governs the Supreme Court and all the courts of the land. So what can we accomplish? Well, what we've already accomplished in 2020 is we had the first hearing in, I believe it was 46 years, in the U.S. House of Representatives on removing the deadline on the Equal Rights Amendment so that it can finally pass. That was in 2020. They passed it through the U.S. House of Representatives. In 2020, in January of this year, Virginia became the 38th state in the nation to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. It takes 38 states, according to the Constitution, to ratify a constitutional amendment. So now we've achieved it. We have arrived. However, now the lawsuits. So we are fighting this in the legislative branches, we're fighting it in the judicial branch, and in 2020, it's a presidential election, it's a national election, we're fighting it in the elections. So I am very hopeful. I know that we will get the Equal Rights Amendment into our U.S. Constitution and into our state constitution. It's a matter of time, but we're on the right side of history. We won't take no for an answer, and we will prevail.
Woohoo! Antonia, sorry, Alyssa, I know.
So difficult to have one word. But I think that let's keep in mind that we hold half of the world. So it's very important that we also participate. Otherwise, this world is not going to be balanced. And we need that solidarity. We need to participate, and we really need to unite. We can't win this divided. So let's enable each other. Let's carry each other on our shoulders.
I would choose intersectionality and unity for our next big move. Yep.
Awesome.
Transformation is my word, and I use the word transformation instead of change because I think transformation requires something a little bit more deeper than just change, but transformation is really dramatically shifting and changing how we think about ourselves, how we think about each other, and what we see for the vision of our communities.
I cannot compete with that. Can we give him a round of applause, please? Thank you so much. I hope you stay around and meet with people. Thank you so much.